Greetings, dear friends. Tonight, we embark on a journey through the timeless world of ancient Greek mythology to meet one of its most extraordinary figures, Heracles. He is remembered not only for his unimaginable strength, but also for his humanity, for the moments of weakness, sorrow, and doubt that make his story both majestic and profoundly moving. Heracles is not merely a hero. He is the symbol of the eternal human struggle against darkness, of redemption through suffering, and of the endless pursuit to rise above one's limits. But why do the myths of Heracles, born thousands of years ago, continue to resonate with us even now? Perhaps because they speak to something deeply human, the battle we all wage against chaos, both in the world and within ourselves. His 12 labors were more than feats of physical power. Each one was a trial of the soul, a test of endurance, courage, and wisdom, where the true victory was not in conquering monsters, but in mastering the self. Tonight, we will journey through these 12 trials, through the roars of beasts, the weight of impossible tasks, and the silence of reflection that followed each triumph. We will glimpse Heracles not only as a warrior, but as a man who suffered, served, loved, and lost, and who, through pain and perseverance, transcended mortality to take his place among the gods. This lecture is not just a retelling of ancient legends, it is an invitation to rediscover what they truly mean. Because the story of Heracles reminds us that even the greatest heroes stumble, and that within every failure lies the seed of transformation. So, prepare your tea, settle into comfort, and allow the voice of the past to guide you. Let us step together into the myth, into the story of Heracles, the man who became a god, and whose labors continue to inspire the strength and spirit of humanity across the ages. To the birth and upbringing of Heracles in the ancient city of Mycenae, there once ruled King Electryon, a proud descendant of Perseus. But peace never lingers long in the houses of heroes. From across the sea came the Telepones, fierce warriors led by the sons of King Euryalus. They raided Mycenaean lands, drove away Electryon's herds, and in battle, killed his sons. Grief-stricken and thirsting for vengeance, Electryon declared that whoever avenged his sons and returned his herds would take the hand of his daughter, the radiant Alcmene. Among those who answered his call was Amphitryon, a noble and courageous warrior. Through cunning and diplomacy, Amphitryon recovered the stolen herds without bloodshed, for the Telebone king had entrusted them to Polixenus, ruler of Elis, who, sympathizing with Amphitryon's cause, returned them peacefully. Thus, Amphitryon won both the herds and Alcmene's hand, but fate, ever cruel to those touched by greatness, did not allow their union to end in joy. During the wedding feast, a quarrel arose over the cattle, and in a moment of anger, Amphitryon struck down Electryon. From that moment, exile became his destiny. He fled Mycenae with Alcmene, finding refuge in Thebes under the protection of King Cretan. Alcmene followed her husband into exile but made him swear a solemn oath. She would share his life only when he avenged the death of her brothers. Eager to prove himself, Amphitryon departed to wage war against the Telebones, leaving Alcmene alone in Thebes. It was then that Zeus, enthralled by her beauty and purity, descended from Olympus, taking the form of her absent husband. That night, the king of the gods lay with her, and destiny itself was conceived. When Amphitryon returned the next morning, he too shared her bed, unaware that two fathers now shared one fate. From Zeus, Alcmene would bear Alcestis, the child who would one day be known as Heracles, and from Amphitryon, she bore Iphicles, his mortal twin, on the day destined for Heracles' birth. The gods gathered on high Olympus. Proudly, Zeus proclaimed before them all that a son of his blood would be born that day, a hero who would rule over all who descended from Perseus. But Hera, queen of the heavens, seethed with rage that her husband had lain with a mortal woman. She devised a cruel deception. Feigning innocence, she said to Zeus, "Swear the sacred oath of the gods that the first of the Perseid line born this day shall rule over all his kin." Blinded by pride, Zeus swore. Then Hera mounted her golden chariot and sped to Argos, where another Perseid woman, the wife of Sthenelus, was heavy with child. There she hastened the birth of a frail infant named Eurystheus, and proclaimed before Olympus that the firstborn of the Perseids had come into the world. Only then did Zeus understand the depth of her deceit. In fury, he seized Ate, the goddess of delusion who had clouded his mind, and cast her down from the heavens, condemning her to dwell among mortals forever. But the oath could not be undone. And so Zeus decreed that his son would serve Eurystheus for 12 great labors, but once those trials were complete, he would be freed from mortal bonds and take his place among the gods. To aid him, Zeus appointed Athena, goddess of wisdom, to guide Heracles through all that lay ahead. When Alcmene's twins were born, Zeus's son was named Alcestis, but the oracle of Delphi later renamed him Heracles, the glory of Hera, a name meant to appease the goddess who hated him most. Yet Hera's wrath began even before he could walk. As the infant lay in his cradle beside his brother, she sent two serpents, their eyes burning with emerald light, to slither through the darkness and coil around the baby's body. But the child of Zeus awoke. Without fear, he reached out his tiny hands, seized the snakes by the neck, and crushed them. When Alcmene rushed in, she found her son smiling, holding two lifeless serpents in his fists. Amphitryon called for the prophet Tiresias, who foretold that this child would one day perform countless heroic deeds and ascend to immortality. Amphitryon took great care in his son's upbringing. Heracles was trained not only in strength but also in knowledge and the arts befitting a noble hero. He learned to read, write, sing, and play the lyre. Yet his heart was not made for gentle pursuits. His teacher, Lenos, the brother of Orpheus, often scolded him for his impatience. One day, angered by his rebuke, the young Heracles struck Lenos with his lyre, and the blow was so powerful it killed him instantly. Brought before a court, the boy defended himself calmly, saying, "Does not the wise judge Erymanthius declare that he who is struck may strike in return?" The judges acquitted him, but Amphitryon, fearing for his son's future, sent him away to the hills of Cithaeron. There, among the rugged pastures, the youth tended cattle and grew in solitude and strength. The mountains became his teachers, the winds his song, and the silence his discipline. Far from the courts of kings, Heracles, son of Zeus, began the long journey toward his destiny, the journey of a man who would one day become a god. Heracles in Thebes. In the shadowed forests of Cithaeron, Heracles grew into a man of extraordinary might. His height surpassed that of an immortal by a full head, and his strength was said to exceed even that of 10 men combined. No one could rival him in the arts of war. His aim was unerring, whether he wielded bow or spear, and his hands, though born of a mortal mother, seemed guided by divine power. While still a youth, he faced his first great test, the Ceryneian lion, a monstrous beast that ravaged herds and terrified the shepherds of the mountain slopes. Alone and unafraid, Heracles tracked it through the rocky passes. When the beast sprang upon him, he wrestled it barehanded, crushing its life with a power that seemed more than human. From its body he took its hide, a trophy and a symbol. He draped the lion's skin across his broad shoulders, fastening the paws upon his chest, while the head became his helmet. From that day on, the skin of the lion became his armor, and the world first saw in him not just a man, but a legend in the making. To complete his image as a warrior favored by the gods, he fashioned a mighty club from an ash tree he had uprooted in the sacred grove of Nemean, hard as iron, heavy as destiny itself. The gods, too, bestowed their gifts upon him. Hermes gave him a sword, Apollo his bow and arrows, Hephaestus a gleaming golden breastplate, and Athena wove his garments with her own hands. As he reached manhood, Heracles' name became known beyond Thebes. In battle, he defeated Erginus, king of Orchomenus, who had long demanded heavy tribute from Thebes. In that war, Heracles not only slew the tyrant but forced his people to pay double the tribute they once exacted. Grateful for his courage, King Cretan of Thebes offered him his daughter Megara in marriage. From their union came 3 sons bright, strong, and beloved. For a time, Heracles knew peace. He lived happily within the 7-gated walls of Thebes, loved by his wife, honored by his people, and admired by all Greece. But Hera, whose hatred burned and dimmed, had not forgotten the son of Zeus. Her vengeance came not with thunder or flame, but as a whisper that entered Heracles' mind, a madness born of divine spite. Seized by frenzy, he no longer knew friend from foe. In that dreadful haze, he raised his weapons against those he loved most. When the madness lifted, his house lay silent. His wife, his children, and even the children of his brother Iphicles were gone. Horror and grief consumed him. For days he wandered, haunted by what his hands had done, begging the gods for forgiveness. At last, he came to Delphi, to the temple of Apollo, to seek the gods' counsel. There, through the voice of the Pythia, the oracle spoke, "Go to Tiryns, land of your forefathers. Serve the weak king Eurystheus for 12 years, and through 12 labors of sorrow and valor, you shall find your redemption and your immortality." Thus began the path that would lead Heracles from man to myth. He journeyed to Tiryns, where he entered the service of Eurystheus, the very man born of Hera's deceit. The king, cowardly and jealous, feared the hero he commanded and forbade him from entering Mycenae. Instead, he sent all his orders through his herald, Copreus, a petty messenger between greatness and fear. And so Heracles, son of Zeus, God-born yet bound to human suffering, took upon himself the burden of 12 impossible labors, not to please the gods, but to cleanse his soul and claim the immortality promised to him by fate. The Nemean Lion, Heracles' first labor. Heracles did not have to wait long for his first command from King Eurystheus. The cowardly ruler, driven by both fear and envy, ordered him to perform an impossible task, to slay the Nemean Lion. This monstrous creature, born of the dreadful Typhon and Echidna, was of enormous size and terrorized the region near the town of Nemea. Its hide was said to be impenetrable. No weapon forged by mortals could pierce it. When Heracles arrived in Nemea, he immediately set out into the mountains to find the beast's lair. It was midday when he reached the forested slopes, but the land was eerily silent. No shepherds tended their flocks, no farmers worked their fields. All living things had fled in fear of the lion's wrath. Heracles searched through ravines and rocky cliffs until, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, he finally discovered the creature's den, a vast, shadowed cave with 2 openings. Understanding the nature of the hunt, Heracles blocked one entrance with great stones and positioned himself near the other, waiting. As twilight fell, the monstrous lion appeared, its mane wild and golden, its eyes burning like fire. Heracles drew his bow and let fly 3 arrows in swift succession, but to his astonishment, each one bounced harmlessly off the lion's hide as if striking bronze. The beast roared, and the mountains echoed like thunder. Its terrible cry rolled through the valley, shaking the earth. Then, in a flash of fury, the lion charged. Heracles met the attack head-on. His club flashed like lightning as he swung it down with the strength of a god. The blow struck the lion's skull, felling it to the ground. Seizing his chance, Heracles threw down his weapon, grappled the creature with his bare arms, and strangled it with sheer might until the life left its body, lifting the enormous carcass onto his shoulders. Heracles carried it back to Nemea. There, he sacrificed to Zeus and established the Nemean Games in honor of his victory, a festival that would echo through the ages as a symbol of strength and endurance. When Heracles brought the slain lion to Mycenae, King Eurystheus turned pale with terror at the sight of the creature. He realized perhaps for the first time, that the son of Zeus wielded a power beyond mortal comprehension. From that day forward, Eurystheus forbade Heracles to enter the city gates. Whenever the hero returned from his labors, the king would cower behind the high walls of Mycenae, peering down in awe and fear at the man destined to become immortal. The Lernaean Hydra, Heracles' second labor after the triumph over the Nemean Lion. Eurystheus, still trembling with envy and fear, sent Heracles on another deadly mission to slay the Lernaean Hydra. This terrifying creature, born of Typhon and Echidna, had the body of a serpent and 9 dragon heads, one of which was immortal. It dwelled in the marshes near the city of Lerna, and when it emerged from its dark lair, it brought death to flocks, villages, and all living things around it. Heracles set out on this perilous journey accompanied by Iolaus, the son of his brother Iphicles. When they reached the misty swamps of Lerna, Heracles left Iolaus with the chariot in a nearby grove and went on foot toward the creature's lair. The air was heavy with decay. The stench of poison hung over the water. He found the Hydra lurking in a vast cavern surrounded by reeds and bog. Heracles lit his arrows until they glowed red-hot, and began to shoot them one by one into the darkness. The creature stirred. Enraged by the burning pain, the Hydra slithered out from its cave, its glistening scales reflecting the firelight, its monstrous heads writhing in fury. It rose high upon its tail and struck. But Heracles, unflinching, stepped forward and pinned the serpent's body beneath his foot. Pressing it to the ground with godlike strength, the Hydra coiled around his legs, tightening with crushing force. But the hero stood firm as a mountain. With his heavy club, he began to strike each blow, sending one of the serpent's heads tumbling to the ground. Yet from every severed neck, 2 new heads immediately grew, hissing and snapping. The more he fought, the stronger it became. Then came another danger. A monstrous crab, sent by a hero to aid the Hydra, crept from the marsh and clamped its claws into Heracles' leg. Enduring the pain, the hero called for Iolaus. Brave and quick-witted, Iolaus rushed to help. He killed the crab and then seized burning branches from the nearby grove. As Heracles struck off each head, Iolaus cauterized the wound with fire, searing the neck so that no new heads could grow. At last, the Hydra began to weaken. Even its immortal head could not withstand the assault. Heracles struck one final blow. The creature fell, its head silenced forever. To ensure it would never rise again, Heracles buried the immortal head deep beneath the earth and rolled a massive boulder atop it. Then, with grim purpose, he cut open the Hydra's body and dipped his arrows into its poisonous blood. From that day on, the wounds inflicted by Heracles' arrows could never be healed. Triumphant, the son of Zeus returned to Tiryns, his fame greater than ever. Yet even as he stood in glory, another command from Eurystheus awaited him, for the labors of Heracles had only just begun. The Stymphalian birds, Heracles' third labor for his next task. Eurystheus commanded Heracles to rid Arcadia of the dreadful Stymphalian birds, monstrous creatures that had turned the lands around the city of Stymphalian into a desolate wasteland. These savage birds preyed upon both animals and humans, tearing them apart with their razor-sharp bronze beaks and claws. Yet their most terrifying weapon was their feathers, each one made of solid metal. When the birds took flight, they could hurl these feathers down like deadly arrows upon anyone who dared to approach. This was no ordinary hunt, and even Heracles found himself uncertain how to fight such creatures. Seeing his struggle, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, descended to aid him. She gave Heracles to great bronze crotal of clappers forged by Hephaestus himself and instructed him to climb a hill near the marsh where the birds nested. "Strike them together," she said, "and their sound will drive the flock into the air. When they rise, take your bow and strike." Following the goddess's counsel, Heracles ascended the hill overlooking the dark forest and struck the bronze clappers together. A deafening, metallic roar filled the valley. The birds, startled by the echo that shattered their eerie silence, burst into the sky in a wild, screeching cloud. Their bronze feathers rained down in a deadly storm, piercing the earth all around him, yet none could touch the hero standing firm on the hill. Heracles raised his bow and let fly arrow after arrow. His poisoned shafts, dipped in the blood of the Lernaean Hydra, struck their targets with unerring precision. One by one, the monstrous birds fell from the sky until the survivors, terrified, fled far beyond the borders of Greece over the Black Sea to the distant shores of the Pontus Euxinus. Thus, the hero cleansed Arcadia of the Stymphalian plague and fulfilled the will of Eurystheus. But even as he returned to Turin's, the messenger of the cowardly king was already preparing to summon him again to face yet another, even greater challenge on his path to immortality. The Ceryneian Hind Heracles' fourth labor, knowing that Artemis, goddess of the hunt, had sent a sacred creature to punish mortals. Eurystheus devised a cunning challenge for Heracles. He was to capture the Ceryneian hind alive and bring it back to Mycenae unharmed. This was no ordinary animal, it was a divine creature of breathtaking beauty, with golden antlers and hooves of bronze, swift as the wind and tireless in its grace. The hind roamed freely through the forests and valleys of Arcadia, and no mortal hunter had ever come close to catching it. For an entire year, Heracles pursued the sacred hind. It sped through mountain passes, leapt across chasms, and crossed wide rivers, never slowing, never resting. From Arcadia, it raced northward through unknown lands, all the way to the edges of the world, to the realm of the Hyperboreans, where the great river Istros, the Danube, began its flow. There, at last, the hind paused to drink, but when Heracles approached, it sprang away once more, flying south like an arrow loosed from the bow of the gods. At last, back in Arcadia, Heracles managed to overtake it. Realizing that brute strength would be useless against a creature sacred to the immortals, he used his skill instead. With his unmatched precision, he loosed an arrow that struck the hind gently in the leg, wounding it just enough to slow its flight without causing harm. Moving carefully, the hero lifted the shining creature onto his shoulders and began the long journey back to Mycenae. But before he could leave the forest, the air shimmered, and Artemis herself appeared, radiant and furious. Her divine voice echoed through the trees, "Heracles, do you not know this hind is mine? Why have you dared to harm the creature I love? Have you forgotten the respect due to the gods of Olympus? Do you think your strength makes you greater than we?" With deep reverence, Heracles bowed his head before the goddess and answered, "Great daughter of Leto, do not condemn me. Never have I sought to offend the immortals, whom I honor with sacrifice and devotion. I am bound by command. Eurystheus ordered me to capture this creature, and the will of the gods themselves has bound me to serve him. I could not disobey." Hearing his words and seeing the sincerity of his heart, Artemis's anger softened. She forgave Heracles, understanding that he acted not out of defiance but duty. Thus, the son of Zeus carried the living hind to Mycenae and presented it to Eurystheus. The king, trembling with both fear and greed, marveled at the divine creature's beauty, but Heracles, ever faithful to the gods, soon released the hind back to the wilds of Arcadia, ensuring that Artemis's sacred gift would roam free once more. This labor became a symbol of restraint, reverence, and wisdom, the moment when even the mightiest of heroes proved that true strength lies not only in power, but in humility before the divine. The Erymanthian Boar and the battle with the Centaurs. Heracles' fifth labor. Heracles had little rest after his pursuit of the golden horned hind before Eurystheus gave him a new and equally perilous task: to capture the Erymanthian boar alive. This monstrous beast, of immense size and strength, dwelled upon the snowy slopes of Mount Erymanthus and ravaged the lands around the city of Sophies, tearing up fields, crushing men and beasts alike with its tusks, and spreading terror through Arcadia. On his journey to Erymanthus, Heracles stopped to visit Pholus, a wise and kindly centaur who welcomed the son of Zeus with great honor and offered him hospitality. During their feast, Pholus opened a great jar of wine to treat his guest, unaware that the sweet fragrance would carry far through the mountains. Soon the other centaurs caught its scent. Enraged that Pholus had dared to open the communal wine without them, they came charging toward his cave in a frenzy, armed with stones and uprooted trees. But Heracles, fearless as ever, leapt up from his seat, crowned with ivy from the feast, and met them head-on. He hurled flaming brands from the hearth into their ranks, scattering them in confusion, then drew his bow. His arrows dipped in the deadly venom of the Hydra cut through the mountain air, striking the centaurs one after another. The survivors fled in panic as Heracles pursued them all the way to Malea, where they sought refuge in the cave of Chiron, the wisest and most noble of their kind, and a dear friend of the hero. In the chaos, Heracles entered the cave, unaware of who was inside. In the fury of battle, he loosed an arrow only to strike Chiron in the knee. When he realized what he had done, Heracles was overcome with grief. He rushed to his friend's side, trying to bind and wash the wound, but the poison of the Hydra was incurable. Even Chiron, immortal though he was, could not endure the agony forever. In time, he chose to surrender his immortality and descend into the underworld, freeing himself from the endless pain. Deeply sorrowful, Heracles left the mountains of Malea and continued his journey to hunt the Erymanthian boar. He tracked it through the forests, driving it from its lair with a thunderous shout. The boar, furious and roaring, charged through the woods, but the hero chased it tirelessly, steering it higher into the mountains. There, in the deep winter snow, the beast's strength failed. It stumbled and became trapped in the drifts. Heracles sprang forward, seized it with his powerful hands, and bound it fast with chains. Lifting the living monster upon his shoulders, he carried it triumphantly back to Mycenae. When Eurystheus saw the massive creature snorting and thrashing in Heracles' grasp, terror overcame him. The cowardly king fled and hid himself in a great bronze jar, trembling while Heracles stood laughing above him. Thus ended the fifth labor of the hero, tale of strength, tragedy, and endurance that showed not only Heracles' might, but also the heavy burden of divine fate that even a son of Zeus could not escape. The Augean stables. Heracles' sixth labor. Not long after Heracles returned to Tiryns, Eurystheus devised yet another challenge, one meant to humiliate the son of Zeus rather than honor him. He ordered Heracles to cleanse, in a single day, the Augean stables, home to the vast herds of King Augeas of Elis, the son of the radiant sun god Helios. Augeas was blessed with immeasurable wealth. Among his possessions were countless herds of cattle, magnificent and divine. 300 of his bulls had hooves white as snow. 200 glowed crimson like Tyrian dye. 12 pure white bulls were sacred to Helios himself, and one bull shining with otherworldly beauty gleamed like a star across the fields. Yet for years, Augeas had never cleansed his stables, and the filth from thousands of animals had piled high, poisoning the air and the land. When Heracles arrived, he made a bold offer. He would cleanse the entire stable in a single day if Augeas would grant him 1/10 of his herds as payment. The king, mocking the idea, agreed. He was certain no man alive could accomplish such a task. Heracles then studied the land around the royal stables and devised a plan not of brute force, but of cunning. He broke down two walls on opposite sides of the enclosure and diverted the flow of two mighty rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus. As the roaring waters surged through the stables, they swept away years of filth and decay, leaving the vast enclosure spotless by sunset. When the work was done, Heracles restored the walls as they were. Proud of his clever triumph, the hero returned to claim his promised reward, but Augean broke his oath. Denying the bargain, he sent Heracles away with nothing. The hero, though furious, held his wrath in check for the time being and returned to Eurystheus, who refused to count this labor, claiming Heracles had performed it for payment. Years later, when his service to Eurystheus was complete, Heracles exacted his vengeance. Leading a great army, he marched upon Elis, defeated Augean in battle, and slain him with a poisoned arrow. Afterward, upon the sacred plain near Pisa, Heracles gathered his warriors, offered sacrifices to the gods of Olympus, and founded the Olympic Games to be held every 4 years in honor of the divine and as a symbol of human strength and excellence. His vengeance did not stop there. Heracles pursued all who had aided Augean, including Neleus, king of Pylos, and his sons. In the ensuing battle, he destroyed the city, killing Neleus and 11 of his sons. Only Nestor, the youngest, survived, and in time he would become one of Greece's wisest kings, a counselor of heroes in the age of the Trojan War. Thus, the cleansing of the Augean stables became not just a symbol of physical strength, but of purification and renewal, a reminder that even divine labor can serve both retribution and creation, and that from the cleansing of corruption, new greatness can be born. The Cretan bull Heracles' seventh labor. For his seventh labor, Heracles was commanded by Eurystheus to leave Greece and journey across the sea to the island of Crete. His task was to capture the Cretan bull and bring it alive to Mycenae. The bull's story began long before Heracles' arrival. The sea god Poseidon, desiring to honor the Cretan king Minos, had sent the king a magnificent bull rising from the depths of the sea, a creature of divine beauty and power. Minos was to sacrifice the bull to Poseidon in gratitude for his favor. But when the time came, Minos' heart faltered. He could not bring himself to kill such a splendid beast. Instead, he kept the divine bull for his own herds and offered another, lesser animal in its place. This act of deception enraged Poseidon. As punishment, he drove the sacred bull into madness, filling it with ungovernable fury. The creature rampaged across Crete, destroying fields, scattering flocks, and striking terror into the hearts of men. None could subdue it. When Heracles arrived on the island, he sought out King Minos, requesting permission to capture the bull. Minos, weary of the beast's destruction, readily agreed. Heracles then tracked the bull through the mountains and forests until he found it by the sea, breathing fire and rage. In a fierce struggle, the hero seized the beast by its horns and, with his unmatched strength, threw it to the ground and subdued it. Once tamed, Heracles mounted the bull's broad back, holding its horns like reins, and rode it across the sea, a sight so wondrous that sailors spoke of it for generations. The waves parted before them, and the winds themselves seemed to carry the hero and his captive toward Greece. When they reached Mycenae, Heracles presented the bull to Eurystheus, but the cowardly king dared not keep the creature, fearing Poseidon's wrath. He ordered it released at once. Freed again, the bull dashed northward, thundering across the Peloponnesian plains until it reached Attica, where it came to rest on the Marathon plain. There, its rampage finally ended at the hands of another great hero, Theseus, prince of Athens, who slew the beast in one of his own famed deeds. Thus the Cretan bull, born from the sea and sanctified by the gods, became a thread binding the tales of two of Greece's greatest heroes, Heracles and Theseus, and a reminder of how defiance of divine will can unleash chaos upon the world. The mares of Diomedes, Heracles' eighth labor. For his eighth labor, Heracles was sent to the wild lands of Thrace, where ruled Diomedes, king of the Bistons, a fierce and warlike tribe. Diomedes possessed for magnificent horses, creatures of great beauty and power. Yet their splendor concealed a horror. These mares were fed on human flesh. Diomedes had chained them with heavy iron in their stables, for no other bonds could restrain their fury. Any stranger who set foot in his kingdom was thrown to the beasts to be devoured alive. With a handful of loyal companions, Heracles set sail for Thrace and reached the cruel king's shores. Under cover of night, he stormed the stables, seized the mares, and drove them toward the coast where his ship awaited. But before he could embark, Diomedes and his warriors came thundering down upon him, furious at the theft, leaving the mares under the watch of Abderus, the young son of Hermes and Heracles' faithful servant. The hero turned to face the Bistons. Though outnumbered, Heracles fought like a tempest of bronze. His arrows cut through the enemy ranks, and his club shattered shields and skulls alike. At last, Diomedes himself fell beneath Heracles' hand, his cruelty ending in the dust of his own battlefield. But when the hero returned to the shore, triumph turned to grief. In his absence, the savage mares had broken loose and tore Abderus to pieces. Stricken with sorrow, Heracles buried his beloved companion with honor, raising a great mound over the grave and founding a city upon that spot, Abdera, named in memory of the fallen youth. Taming the bloodthirsty horses once more, Heracles led them to Mycenae and presented them to Eurystheus. Yet the cowardly king, terrified by their legend, ordered that they be released at once. Freed, the mares fled into the wild northern forests, where they were soon torn apart by wild beasts, fitting punishment for their monstrous nature. Thus ended Heracles' eighth labor, a tale that revealed not only his might in battle but also the tragic cost of heroism. Even in victory, the hero could not escape loss, a reminder that the path to immortality is often paved with grief and sacrifice. Heracles and Admetus, based on Euripides' tragedy Alcestis, as Heracles journeyed by sea toward Thrace to capture the horses of King Diomedes. He chose to stop in the city of Pherae, ruled by his dear friend King Admetus. Yet when Heracles arrived, he found the palace shrouded in mourning. A great tragedy had struck the royal house of Alcestis. The king's wife was destined to die that very day. Long before this, the god Apollo, grateful to Admetus for his kindness, had persuaded the fates to grant the king a rare gift. When his appointed hour of death arrived, he could escape it if someone willingly took his place in the underworld. But when death approached, none among Admetus' people, not even his aged parents, were willing to die for him. Then Alcestis, young and devoted, stepped forward and offered her own life in exchange for her husband's. On the day of her death, Alcestis bathed, adorned herself in funeral robes, and approached the hearth, praying to Hestia, goddess of the home. O holy goddess, this is the last time I kneel before your flame. Guard my children, who will soon be motherless. Let them grow in peace beneath this roof, and may the light of life never fade from them. She decorated the household altars with myrtle, embraced her children, and wept as they clung to her. Her husband Admetus, overcome with despair, begged her to stay, but she already felt the chill presence of Thanatos, the god of death, entering the palace. She cried out in terror, sensing the unseen fairy of Charon calling her name from the shadows. The oars beat the black waters. He calls for me, hurry, hurry. The time is come. Oh, children, I can no longer see the sun. Farewell, my beloved. I go down for you, Admetus. May the light shine for you, not for me. Do not let another woman take my place and harm our children. She died in his arms, and the whole of Pherae mourned. Admetus ordered great honors for her burial and vowed to grieve for her 8 months without rest. It was then that Heracles arrived. Seeing his friend, Admetus concealed his sorrow so as not to dishonor the sacred law of hospitality. Believing that a distant relative of the king had died, Heracles accepted Admetus' welcome and feasted in the palace. Only later did he notice the servants' tears and learn the truth. The queen herself had just died. Shamed and heartbroken, Heracles resolved to repay his friend's kindness. He went at once to the tomb of Alcestis, hid behind it, and waited. Soon he heard the beating of dark wings. Thanatos, the god of death, had come to claim his victim. When the god bent over the blood offering, Heracles sprang from the shadows and grappled with death himself. A terrible struggle followed. The cold breath of Thanatos froze the air. His bony fingers clawed at Heracles' chest. But the hero, son of Zeus, held firm. At last, he subdued the god and demanded Alcestis as his ransom. Bound by his defeat, Thanatos relented and Heracles restored Alcestis to life. Carrying her veiled and silent, Heracles brought her back to Admetus' palace. When the grieving king returned from the funeral, Heracles presented the mysterious woman and asked him to shelter her until his return from Thebes. Admetus refused, saying that no other woman could cross his threshold so soon after his wife's death. But Heracles insisted, and finally Admetus, moved by friendship, took the woman by the hand. "Guard her well," said Heracles, smiling, "for you hold not a stranger, but a gift to prove that the son of Zeus is a true friend." Lifting the veil, Admetus gasped, "Alcestis, my wife, O gods, is it her spirit, or a dream?" Heracles replied, "Not a shadow, but the living Alcestis. I wrested her from the god of death. She will remain silent until her soul is cleansed, and the dawn has thrice returned, then she will speak again. Farewell, Admetus. Be joyful, and remember always the sacred law of hospitality. Blessed by my father Zeus." Admetus fell to his knees in gratitude. "O son of Zeus, you have given me back the light of my life. Stay, and let us honor your victory." But Heracles could not remain. His labor awaited him with the capture of the man-eating horses of Diomedes. And so he departed once more, leaving behind a home where death had been conquered by friendship and divine courage. The girdle of Hippolyta. Heracles' ninth labor. For his ninth labor, Heracles was sent to the distant land of the Amazons to obtain the golden girdle of Queen Hippolyta. The girdle had been a gift from Mars, the god of war, and symbolized the queen's divine authority over her warrior nation. The daughter of King Eurystheus, Admete, a priestess of Hera, desired this sacred object, and thus Heracles was ordered to fetch it for her, gathering a small band of renowned companions, among them the Athenian hero Theseus. Heracles set sail on a long and perilous voyage across the Euxine Sea, the Black Sea. On their way, they stopped at the island of Paros, ruled by the sons of King Minos. There, a quarrel broke out, and 2 of Heracles' men were slain. Enraged, Heracles retaliated fiercely, storming the island, killing many of its inhabitants, and besieging the survivors in their city. Only when the Parians offered him to noble youths, Alcaeus and Sthenelus, grandsons of Minos, in place of his fallen companions, did Heracles relent and sail onward. Next, he came to Mysia, where King Lycus welcomed him with generous hospitality. But soon, an enemy king of the Bebrycians attacked Lycus' realm. Heracles joined the battle, defeated the invader, destroyed his city, and gave the conquered land to his ally, who renamed it Heraclea in the hero's honor. After many trials, Heracles finally reached the Myskira, the fabled capital of the Amazons, a nation of fierce women warriors, daughters of Ars and Harmony, who lived free from the rule of men. Their fame had already spread far across the world, and their queen, Hippolyta, knew well the name of Heracles when the hero's ship arrived on their shores. Hippolyta and her retinue came forth to meet him. Impressed by his noble bearing, she greeted him without hostility and asked, "Son of Zeus, what brings you to our land, peace or war?" Heracles replied, "Queen of the Amazons, I come not as an enemy, but as a servant of destiny. King Eurystheus of Mycenae has sent me here to retrieve your girdle, the gift of ours, as it is desired by his daughter. Admete, I seek it not for greed, but by command of the gods. Moved by his honesty and valor, Hippolyta agreed to give him the girdle willingly. Yet the goddess Hera, ever envious of Heracles, disguised herself as an Amazon and began to spread lies among the warriors. Do you not see? Heracles deceives you. He has come to seize your queen and enslave her. Believing Hera's deceit, the Amazons armed themselves and charged upon the Greeks. Leading the vanguard was the swift Illa, whose name meant whirlwind. She struck first, but Heracles met her blow with his club, and she fell. Then came Proto, fierce and unyielding, who slew 7 of Heracles' men before the hero's arrow found her heart. One by one, 7 companions of Artemis skilled with the spear attacked him, but none could pierce his defense. Heracles struck them down, their bronze armor flashing in the sun as they fell. He captured Melanippe, commander of the Amazon host, and also Antiope, sister to the queen. The battle ended with the Amazons' defeat. To ransom Melanippe, Hippolyta offered her girdle to Heracles, and peace was restored. Heracles then gave Antiope to Theseus in reward for his valor, and together the heroes sailed home. Thus Heracles fulfilled his 9th labor, proving once again that even amidst conflict and divine deceit, honor and strength of purpose can triumph over chaos. The girdle of Hippolyta became not merely a trophy of war, but a symbol of courage tempered by compassion, and of the fragile balance between power and peace. Heracles rescues Hesione, daughter of Laomedon, on his voyage home from the land of the Amazons. Heracles and his companions stopped near the coast of Troy. There, a harrowing sight met their eyes. The beautiful Hesione, daughter of King Laomedon, was chained to a rock by the sea, awaiting her doom. Like Andromeda before her, she had been offered as a sacrifice to a sea monster, sent by the gods as punishment for her father's arrogance. Years earlier, when Poseidon and Apollo had built the mighty walls of Troy for Laomedon at the command of Zeus, the king had refused to pay them their promised reward. Instead, he mocked the gods and threatened to cut off their ears should they ask for their wage. Angered, Apollo sent a plague upon Troy, and Poseidon unleashed a monster from the sea that ravaged the land and devoured its people. The oracle declared that only by sacrificing his daughter Hesione could Laomedon save his kingdom. Reluctantly, the proud king bound her to a rock by the shore and left her to her fate. When Heracles learned of this, he was moved to pity and anger. He offered to save Hesione if Laomedon would reward him with the divine horses that Zeus had once given the Trojan king as ransom for his son Ganymede, whom the eagle of Zeus had carried away to Olympus. Desperate, Laomedon agreed. Heracles ordered the Trojans to build an earthen wall along the beach, and hid behind it with his bow and sword. Soon the monstrous creature rose from the depths, a vast shadow upon the waves, roaring as it lunged toward the helpless maiden. In that instant, Heracles leapt forth from his hiding place. His blade flashed like lightning as he struck, plunging his sword deep into the beast's chest. With a final, thunderous roar, the monster collapsed, and the sea turned crimson with its blood. The hero freed Hesione, restoring her to her father. But when Heracles demanded the promised reward, Laomedon betrayed him. The greedy king refused to surrender the immortal horses and even drove Heracles away with threats and insults. Heracles departed in silence, harboring his wrath deep within his heart. His band was too small to challenge Troy then, and its walls, built by divine hands, were unassailable. Yet he swore that one day he would return to Troy, not as a savior, but as an avenger. For now, he continued his journey to Mycenae, bearing with him the girdle of Hippolyta, and the memory of a broken promise that the gods themselves would one day help him avenge. The cattle of Geryon, Heracles' 10th labor after returning from the land of the Amazons. Heracles set out once more upon a new and distant quest, his 10th labor, commanded by King Eurystheus to bring back the cattle of Geryon, a monstrous giant dwelling at the very edge of the world. Geryon, son of Chrysaor and the ocean nymph Calorho, lived far to the west, beyond all known lands, on the island of Erythea, where the sun god Helios descended each evening into the waters of the ocean. To reach him, Heracles had to journey through Libya, across burning deserts and unknown wildernesses, to the very ends of the earth. When he reached the narrow strait that divided Europe and Africa, Heracles raised two colossal stone pillars, one on each side of the passage, as eternal monuments of his journey. These became known through the ages as the Pillars of Heracles, modern Gibraltar and Ceuta, marking the limits of the mortal world. Still, the hero had to cross the vast ocean to reach Erythea. As he sat on the shore, pondering his path, a chariot of Helios appeared, blazing in its descent toward the western sea. The light was so fierce that even Heracles, son of Zeus, shielded his eyes. In his anguish, he lifted his bow and drew an arrow ready to challenge the sun itself. But Helios, amused by the hero's courage, did not take offense. Instead, he smiled and offered Heracles his golden cup, of the vessel in which the sun god sailed each night across the ocean to return to the east. Heracles gratefully accepted this divine gift, climbed aboard the radiant cup, and soon reached the distant island of Erythea. There, the first to sense his arrival was Orpheus, the two-headed hound of Geryon, brother of Cerberus, fierce guardian of the cattle. The beast attacked at once, but Heracles struck him down with a single blow of his mighty club. Then appeared the herdsman Eurytion, a towering giant, who rushed to defend the herd, yet he too fell beneath the strength of the son of Zeus. When Geryon himself learned what had happened, he thundered across the island in fury. His form was terrible to behold. He had 3 bodies fused together, with 3 heads, 6 arms, and 6 legs, bearing 3 shields and 3 spears. He loomed like a walking fortress, but Athena, goddess of wisdom, stood beside Heracles. As the giant approached, Heracles drew his bow and loosed 3 arrows in quick succession. The first struck Geryon through one of his eyes. The others pierced his hearts. Then, lifting his club, Heracles struck with the force of a storm, and the 3-bodied monster fell. His thunder silenced forever. Heracles loaded the red-skinned cattle of Geryon onto the golden cup of Helios and sailed back across the ocean. Once he reached the shores of Libya, he returned the vessel to the sun god in gratitude. But his trials were far from over. Driving the cattle overland through Spain, across the Pyrenees, through Gaul, the Alps, and into Italy, Heracles faced endless hardship. Near the city of Rhegium, one cow escaped and swam across the strait to Sicily, where King Eryx, son of Poseidon, captured it and added it to his own herd. Heracles followed, demanded its return, and when Eryx refused, the two fought in single combat. Heracles crushed the arrogant king in his arms and reclaimed the cow. Resuming his journey, he drove the cattle through the Ionian coast. But Hera, still unrelenting in her hatred, sent madness upon the herd. The animals scattered in every direction. Only through immense effort did Heracles recover most of them, herding them across Thrace and finally bringing them to Eurystheus in Mycenae. The cowardly king offered the divine cattle as a sacrifice to Hera, never realizing that every drop of their blood stood as a testament to Heracles' endurance, a hero who had crossed the edges of the world itself and returned. Thus the 10th labor ended, and the Pillars of Heracles remained, forever marking the boundary between the mortal realm and the realm of the gods. Cerberus, Heracles' 11th labor. Hardly had Heracles returned to Turns when Eurystheus sent him forth again, this time on a task so perilous that even the gods shuddered at its command. The hero was to descend into the underworld itself, the shadowed realm of Hades, and bring back to the surface the dreadful guardian of its gates, Cerberus, the monstrous hound of hell. Cerberus was no ordinary beast. He had 3 heads, each crowned with writhing serpents. His neck was coiled with snakes, and his tail ended in the fang-filled head of a dragon. His triple jaws foamed with venom, and his roar echoed through the caverns of the dead. To reach him, Heracles journeyed to Laconia, where near Cape Tanerum a dark chasm opened into the world below. There, without fear, the son of Zeus descended into the endless night of Hades' kingdom. At the very gates of the underworld he found 2 heroes, Theseus and Pirithous, king of Thessaly, bound fast to a rock as punishment for attempting to steal Persephone, the queen of the dead. Seeing their torment, Theseus cried out, "O mighty son of Zeus, you alone can end my suffering and free me from these chains." Moved by pity, Heracles stretched forth his hand and tore Theseus from the stone. But when he tried to release Pirithous, the earth shook violently, a sign that the gods forbade it. Respecting their will, Heracles left him and pressed onward, guided by Hermes, the messenger of the gods and conductor of souls, and accompanied by Athena, goddess of wisdom. Heracles strode boldly through the spectral fields of the dead. The shades of mortals fled before him, all but one, the spirit of the fallen hero Meleager, who approached and spoke softly, "O Heracles, by the memory of our friendship, I beg one thing: take care of my orphan sister, Deianira. Let her be your wife and find in you the protector I can no longer be." Heracles promised to honor his friend's dying wish and continued on his way. From the darkness suddenly rose the phantom of Medusa, her bronze hands outstretched, her snakes hissing. Heracles seized his sword, but Hermes stopped him, saying, "Strike not. It is but a shade, powerless and fleeting." At last, Heracles stood before the throne of Hades and Persephone. The lord and queen of the underworld regarded him with wonder and respect, the living son of Zeus standing calmly amid the dead, leaning on his club, lion skin draped across his shoulders, his bow upon his back. Then Heracles spoke, "Great Hades, ruler of the silent realm, do not be angered by my plea. I come not of my own will but under command of Eurystheus, whom the Olympian gods have decreed I must serve. Grant me leave to bring your hound Cerberus to the world above." Hades replied with measured words, "I will grant your request, son of Zeus, but only if you subdue Cerberus without the use of weapons. If you prevail by strength alone, you may take him." Heracles sought the hound across the shadowed plain until he found him on the dark banks of the Ceryn. There Cerberus lunged at him, all 3 heads snapping, venom spraying from his jaws. The hero caught the beast by the throat. The earth trembled with the struggle. Cerberus coiled his serpent tail around Heracles' legs. The dragon had bit deep into his flesh, yet Heracles only tightened his grasp. Slowly the monster's growls turned to whimpers, and at last, half-choked, Cerberus fell subdued. Dragging the enormous creature through the caverns, Heracles led him upward toward the light. When the beast first beheld the sun, he shrieked in terror. Cold sweat poured from his hide, and from the dripping foam of his jaws sprang the first poisonous plants upon the earth. At the gates of Mycenae, Eurystheus came forth, but when he saw Cerberus, the cowardly king turned pale and hid inside a bronze jar, trembling as he begged Heracles to take the monster back. With calm disdain, Heracles obeyed. He returned Cerberus safely to Hades, who honored the hero for his courage and strength. Thus Heracles completed his 11th labor of a journey beyond life itself. He had faced death and returned, proving that even the deepest darkness could not conquer the will of a true son of Zeus. The Apples of the Hesperides, Heracles' 12th and final labor of the final labor of Heracles, commanded by King Eurystheus, was the most difficult of all, a task that would take him beyond the limits of the known world and test even his divine strength. He was to journey to the far west, to the realm of the Titan Atlas, who bore the heavens upon his shoulders, and from the gardens of the Hesperides, the daughters of Atlas, he was to bring back 3 golden apples, These sacred apples grew upon a golden tree that Gaia, the earth herself, had given as a wedding gift to Hera on the day she was wed to Zeus. The garden was guarded by the immortal nymphs, the Hesperides, and by a mighty dragon that never slept. Yet no mortal knew where this enchanted garden lay. The search for the hidden garden, long and weary, was Heracles' search. He wandered through Asia and Europe, retracing the very lands he had crossed on his journey to fetch the cattle of Orion. Wherever he went, he asked about the path to the Hesperides, but none could tell him. At last he came to the far north, to the river Eridanus, whose rushing, shining waters flowed endlessly beneath a sky of cold fire. There, the river nymphs welcomed the son of Zeus with reverence and gave him counsel to find the way to the gardens of the Hesperides. You must capture the wise old man of the sea, Nereus, for he alone knows the secret path. Heracles found Nereus sleeping upon the shore and seized him in his powerful arms. The sea god struggled fiercely, changing shape again and again, now a lion, now a serpent, now water itself, but Heracles held fast. At last, exhausted, Nereus surrendered and revealed the path that led to the western edge of the world, the battle with Antaeus following Nereus' directions. Heracles journeyed through Libya, where he met the giant Antaeus, son of Poseidon and Gaia. Antaeus forced every traveler to wrestle with him and killed all whom he defeated. He challenged Heracles to combat, but Antaeus drew his strength from the earth itself, his mother Gaia. Every time he touched the ground, his power renewed. Heracles realized the secret of his might and, lifting the giant high into the air, wrenched him from the earth. Cut off from his source of life, Antaeus weakened, and Heracles crushed him in his arms until he lay dead. The sacrifice of Busiris continuing on his way. Heracles entered Egypt, where he rested in the shade beside the Nile. There, the cruel king Busiris, son of Poseidon, ordered his capture. For 9 years Egypt had suffered famine, and an oracle had told Busiris that the land would be freed only if a foreigner were sacrificed to Zeus each year. Busiris had begun this dark ritual by sacrificing the very prophet who revealed it. Now he sought to slay Heracles, but when they bound the son of Zeus and brought him to the altar, he burst his chains, seized his club, and struck down Busiris and his son Amphidamas, ending the bloodshed and freeing Egypt from the tyrant's cruelty. The Titan who held the sky, Heracles traveled onward until at last he reached the western edge of the world, where the Titan Atlas stood, vast and weary, bearing the heavens upon his broad shoulders. The hero approached and spoke with reverence. Great Atlas, son of Euripides, I am Heracles, child of Zeus. I come at the command of King Eurystheus, who has ordered me to bring him 3 golden apples from your daughter's garden. Atlas regarded the hero with a slow, thunderous voice. I will bring you the apples, son of Zeus, but in my absence. You must take my place and hold up the sky. Heracles agreed. He braced his feet upon the rock, raised his arms, and received upon his shoulders the immense weight of the heavens. The stars pressed down upon him. His muscles swelled like mountains, his breath grew heavy, and sweat poured from his body like rain. Yet through divine endurance, and with the silent aid of Athena, he held firm. After a long time, Atlas returned, carrying the 3 golden apples, their light shimmering like captured suns. But the Titan, longing to be free, said slyly, I will carry these apples to Eurystheus myself. Heracles, you remain here and bear the sky for me until I return. Heracles immediately saw the deceit. Smiling calmly, he replied, agreed, noble Atlas, but first, let me ease the weight upon my shoulders. I will place a cushion to protect my back. Hold the heavens again for a moment while I do so. Atlas consented and took back the sky. In that instant, Heracles seized the apples, lifted his bow and club, and said with a proud smile, farewell, Atlas. I bore the heavens for you, but not forever. And with that, he departed, leaving the Titan once again bound to his eternal burden. The return of the apples. Heracles returned to Mycenae and presented the golden apples to Eurystheus, who, awed by their beauty, dared not keep them. He gave them back to Heracles, and the hero, in turn, offered them to Athena, daughter of Zeus and goddess of wisdom. Athena restored the sacred fruit to the gardens of the Hesperides, where they would shine eternally beneath the western sky. Thus ended the 12th and greatest labor of Heracles, the feat that carried him from the depths of the underworld to the edge of creation, from the hands of Titans to the favor of the gods. Freed at last from the service of Eurystheus, the hero returned to Thebes. But peace was not yet his destiny, for though he had conquered monsters and defied death itself, the wrath of Hera still followed him, and the shadow of new trials waited beyond the horizon. Heracles and Euripides, of a wound of pride and the price of redemption, in the city of Oechalia, on the island of Euboea, ruled King Euripides, famed across all Greece as the greatest master of the bow. His skill had been taught by none other than Apollo, who had even gifted him a sacred bow and arrows. In his youth, Heracles himself had learned the art of archery under Euripides' guidance. Years later, after completing his service to Eurystheus, Heracles traveled to Oechalia to compete in a great archery contest. Euripides had declared that he would give his beautiful daughter, Iole, in marriage to whichever hero could surpass him in skill. Warriors from every corner of Greece gathered, but none could match the son of Zeus. Heracles' arrows flew true, swift as lightning, and struck every target with divine precision. He had won the contest in by oath, Iole's hand. Yet Euripides broke his word. Forgetting both honor and hospitality, he mocked Heracles before all, saying that no daughter of his would wed a man who had once been a slave to Eurystheus. His proud sons joined him in laughter, and at last, drunk from the feast, they drove Heracles from the palace and out of Oechalia. Deeply wounded and humiliated, Heracles departed in sorrow, for he had truly come to love the gentle Iole. Yet behind that sorrow smoldered the embers of wrath. The death of Iphitus, not long after. The herds of Euripides were stolen by the cunning thief Autolycus, son of Hermes. But the king, blinded by anger, accused Heracles of the theft, believing it an act of revenge. Only Iphitus, Euripides' eldest son and a loyal friend to Heracles, refused to believe the accusation. Seeking to prove his friend's innocence, Iphitus set out to find the stolen cattle and came to Turns, where Heracles received him with warmth and honor. But fate, guided by the relentless hatred of Hera, struck once again. While the two stood upon the high battlements of Turns, speaking together, a sudden madness seized Heracles. His mind darkened. He remembered the insult of Euripides and his sons, and, overcome by rage, he turned upon Iphitus. Forgetting friendship and reason alike, he grasped the young man and hurled him from the wall. Iphitus fell to his death upon the rocks below. When the madness passed, horror and grief fell upon Heracles. He had broken the sacred laws of hospitality and betrayed the bonds of friendship, crimes that even the gods abhorred. In anger, Zeus struck his son with a grievous illness. The struggle for redemption tormented by his guilt and sickness, Heracles journeyed to Delphi, seeking the counsel of Apollo's oracle, the Pythia. Yet when he entered the temple, the priestess refused to speak to him, calling him impure for the blood he had shed. She ordered him to leave. Fury blazed once more in Heracles' heart. In defiance, he seized the sacred tripod from which the oracle gave her prophecies and carried it away. Immediately, Apollo himself appeared, radiant and wrathful, demanding its return. Thus began a terrible struggle of God against demigod, light against strength. The immortal and the mortal grappled in fury, shaking the temple and the mountains. But before divine blood could be spilled, Zeus hurled a thunderbolt from Olympus, separating his sons and ending the battle. Peace was restored. Heracles and Apollo were reconciled, and the Pythia, now calm, gave her prophecy. Your body shall be healed, Heracles, when you have served 3 years in bondage. The price paid for your service shall go to Euripides, as blood compensation for his slain son, the slave of Omphale. Thus, for the second time, the mightiest of mortals was sold into servitude. Heracles became the slave of Queen Omphale of Lydia, daughter of the river god Dardanus. Even Hermes himself carried the payment to Euripides, but the proud king, still blinded by arrogance, refused the ransom, rejecting both mercy and reconciliation. And so, though Heracles was now bound to a mortal woman far from Greece, the shadow of Eurytus' insult and of Iole, the woman he had loved, would not fade. From this wound of pride and sorrow, the seeds of Heracles' final tragedy began to grow. Heracles and Deianira of the river, the centaur, and the seed of tragedy. After being driven from Oechalia by King Eurytus, the great Heracles journeyed to Calydon, the city of Aeneas, king of Aetolia. There he came to claim the hand of Deianira, Aeneas' beautiful daughter, the very sister of Meleager, who, from the realm of shades, had once begged Heracles to marry and protect her. But Heracles was not the only suitor. Among those seeking Deianira's hand was Achilles, the mighty river god of Greece. Aeneas, uncertain how to choose between mortal hero and divine suitor, decreed that Deianira would marry whichever man proved victorious in a contest of strength. All the others withdrew in fear. None dared face Achilles, whose currents carved valleys and flooded plains. Only Heracles stepped forward. Seeing his mortal challenger, Achilles mocked him with scorn. "You call yourself the son of Zeus and Alcmene. You lie, Heracles. No son of a god would bow his neck in service to men." At these words, Heracles' eyes blazed with anger. "Achilles," he said coldly, "your tongue may be sharp, but my hands will speak louder." The battle with the river god, they clashed with the fury of two storms meeting above the mountains. The ground shook beneath their feet as they wrestled. Achilles stood unmoved, like a cliff that resists the crashing sea. 3 times Heracles tried to lift him, and 3 times the river god stood firm. On the 4th attempt, Heracles seized him from behind and hurled him down, pressing him to the earth with the strength of a thunderbolt. To escape defeat, Achilles changed his form first into a serpent, coiling to strike. But Heracles only laughed. "Even in my cradle, I fought serpents sent by Hera. You may be stronger than most, Achilles, but not stronger than the Hydra, and I crushed even her." He seized the snake by the neck and squeezed until it writhed helplessly. Then, transforming once more, Achilles became a raging bull and charged. Heracles met him head-on, grasped his horns, and wrestled him to the ground. With one tremendous motion, he snapped one of his horns, breaking the river god's power. Defeated, Achilles surrendered. Thus Aeneas gave Deianira as wife to Heracles, and their wedding was celebrated with songs and feasts throughout Calydon. They exiled from Calydon, but peace would not last. During a banquet in Aeneas' palace, a young servant named Eunomus, son of the king's friend Architeles, accidentally poured water meant for washing feet upon Heracles' hands. Angered by the mistake, the hero struck the boy too hard. Eunomus fell dead. Though Architeles forgave the unintentional act, Heracles was filled with grief and guilt. Unable to stay in a place touched by such tragedy, he left Calydon with Deianira and began his journey back toward Tiryns, the river Avenues, and the centaur Nessus. On their way, they came to the swift and dangerous river Avenues, swollen with violent currents. There they met the centaur Nessus, who earned his living by carrying travelers across upon his broad back. "Let me bear your wife to the other side," he said smoothly. Trusting him, Heracles placed Deianira upon the centaur's back, then threw his bow and club across the river and began to swim. But as soon as Nessus reached the far bank, his heart was seized by lust. Forgetting fear, he tried to carry Deianira away. She cried out for help, her voice rising above the roar of the river. Heracles turned, his voice thundering across the waters. "Where do you run, treacherous beast? You think your hooves will save you? My arrow flies faster than your legs." He drew his bow, and from the taut string flew a poisoned arrow, tipped with the deadly venom of the Lernaean Hydra. It struck Nessus through the back and out through his chest. The centaur fell to his knees, blood pouring into the earth. But dying, Nessus conceived a dark revenge. Calling Deianira to him, he said in a trembling voice, "O daughter of Aeneas, I have carried many across these waters, but you shall be the last. Take some of my blood and keep it safe. If ever Heracles' love turns from you, this blood will win it back. No woman will ever be dearer to him, only anoint his garment with it." Deianira, innocent and trusting, took the blood and sealed it away, believing in Nessus' words. Then the centaur died, and his body was swept away by the river's current. And knowing of the curse she carried, Deianira rejoined Heracles, and together they reached Turnus, where, for a time, they lived in peace. Yet the poison of the Hydra, mingled with the deceit of Nessus, had already taken root in fate. What had begun as love and victory would, in time, become the tragedy that ended the greatest hero's life. Heracles and Omphale, the humbling of a hero for the killing of Iphitus. Heracles was condemned by the oracle of Delphi to be sold into servitude for 3 years. Thus the mightiest of mortals, the conqueror of monsters and the son of Zeus, became the slave of Omphale, the proud queen of Lydia. Never before had Heracles endured such humiliation. He who had wrestled death, slain lions, and held the heavens upon his shoulders now found himself mocked, adorned in women's robes, and set to labor at a spinning wheel. Omphale seemed to delight in degrading him. She dressed the great hero in silken garments, placed a distaff in his hands, and made him spin wool beside her maidens, the same hands that had once wielded the club of Nemesis and drawn the bow that slew the Hydra. Meanwhile, she herself wore Heracles' lion skin, dragging its heavy mane behind her, and fastened about her waist his golden sword belt and gleaming cuirass. Lifting his massive club, which she could barely raise, she would strike playful poses before him, laughing as if to mock the godlike strength of her servant. And Heracles, bound by the will of the gods and his vow of atonement, endured in silence. For 3 long years he obeyed the commands of the Lydian queen, bearing her ridicule as once he had borne the weight of the heavens. The mischief of the circups, only on rare occasions did Omphale allow Heracles to leave her palace. Once, during such a time, the weary hero fell asleep beneath the shade of a grove near Ephesus. As he slept, a pair of mischievous forest dwarfs of the circups crept toward him, hoping to steal his bow and arrows, but Heracles awoke just as they laid hands upon his weapons. He seized the tricksters easily, bound their hands and feet, and slung them from a pole he carried across his shoulders, their faces dangling downward. The circuits, however, made such ridiculous grimaces and jokes as they hung there that even mighty Heracles burst into laughter and in good humor. He let them go, the tyrant of Aulis, during his servitude. Heracles also traveled to Aulis, where ruled King Silius, a cruel man who forced every foreign traveler to labor like a slave in his vineyards. When Heracles arrived, Silius demanded the same of him. Heracles obeyed for a time, but soon his patience ended. In wrath, he uprooted all the vines, tearing the vineyard to ruins, and slew the tyrant himself, who had dared to violate the sacred laws of hospitality. Freedom restored even while bound in servitude, Heracles did not cease to perform heroic deeds. Legends tell that during these years he even joined the Argonauts in their fabled quest for the Golden Fleece. At last, his 3 years of punishment came to an end. The yoke of slavery was lifted, and Heracles, purified of his guilt and his shame, was free once more. He had endured the humbling of a god-born hero, and though the memory of Omphale's laughter would follow him, his spirit remained unbroken, for no chain, mortal or divine, could bind the will of the son of Zeus. Heracles takes Troy. Vengeance of the son of Zeus. No sooner had Heracles regained his freedom from Queen Omphale than his heart turned once more to unfinished business. Vengeance. Years earlier, King Laomedon of Troy had deceived him, denying the promised reward for saving his daughter Hesione from the sea monster sent by Poseidon. Now, Heracles gathered an army of heroes and set sail aboard 18 ships, determined to make Laomedon pay for his betrayal. The siege of Troy. When Heracles' fleet reached the shores of Troy, he left a small guard under Heracles to protect the ships and led the rest of his warriors to the city's mighty walls. But soon after his departure, Laomedon launched a sudden attack upon the camp. The Trojans overwhelmed the small guard, killed Heracles, and nearly destroyed the entire detachment. Hearing the cries of battle, Heracles turned back with fury. His warriors fell upon the Trojans like a storm. Laomedon's army broke and fled, seeking refuge behind the city gates. Heracles surrounded Troy and began the assault. The siege did not last long. With courage and cunning, the hero Telamon, one of Heracles' companions, was the first to scale the walls and force his way into the city. When Heracles saw that another had entered Troy before him, anger blazed in his heart. He drew his sword, ready to strike Telamon down for his boldness. But the quick-witted warrior knelt, began piling stones, and said calmly, "I am building an altar to Heracles the victor." Heracles paused, his wrath dissolving into laughter. He embraced Telamon, honoring his bravery and cleverness, and together they stormed through the city's streets. The fall of Laomedon. When Troy finally fell, Heracles drew his bow and slain King Laomedon along with all his sons, all except the youngest, Podarces, whom he spared at Hesione's plea. To reward the brave Telamon, Heracles gave him Hesione's hand in marriage and granted her one wish: she could free one captive. She chose her brother Podarces. But Heracles said sternly, "He cannot be freed without ransom. Pay his price, and he shall live." Hesione took the veil from her head and offered it as payment. "Then let him be called Priam, the purchased one," said Heracles. Thus Podarces, now Priam, became the new ruler of Troy, the same king whose fate, many years later, would be sealed by the coming of another war, born from the seed of this very vengeance, the storm of Hera. When Heracles departed from Troy with his fleet, Hera, still burning with hatred for the son of Zeus, conspired to destroy him. She turned to Hypnos, the god of sleep, and begged him to lull Zeus into slumber, so that the thunderer would not see what she intended to do. Once Zeus slept, Hera unleashed a tempest of terrifying power. The sea rose in black waves, and lightning tore the skies. Heracles' ships were scattered and hurled across the Augean until a few, battered and broken, were cast ashore upon the island of Kos. The wrath of Zeus, the people of Kos, mistaking Heracles and his warriors for pirates, refused them landing and attacked with stones. Enraged, the heroes stormed the island under cover of night, slew their king Euripides, son of Poseidon, and took the land by force. When Zeus awoke and learned how near his son had come to death, his fury was boundless. In his wrath, he bound Hera in unbreakable golden chains and hung her between heaven and earth, fastening heavy anvils to her feet as punishment for her deceit. And so the skies trembled once more, not from battle, but from the eternal discord of the gods themselves, whose rivalries shaped the fates of heroes and kingdoms alike. Thus ended Heracles' vengeance upon Troy, a victory that would echo through time, casting long shadows toward the next war that would destroy the same city once again. Heracles and the War of the Gods against the giants upon the island of Kos, where Heracles had taken refuge after the storm sent by Hera. A messenger descended from the heavens. It was Athena Pallas, the bright-eyed daughter of Zeus. She came to summon her brother, the mighty son of Zeus and Alcmeon, to aid the Olympian gods in their great and terrible war of the Gigantomachy, the battle against the giants. The birth and ambition of the giants. The giants were born of Gaia, the earth herself, who conceived them from the blood of the sky god Uranus, spilled upon her when he was overthrown by Cronus. From that blood arose monstrous beings of immense power of men whose legs were coiling serpents, and whose hair fell in wild and kempt tangles over their shoulders. These giants, proud of their might, grew bold and rose in rebellion against the gods of Olympus, seeking to seize dominion over heaven and earth. Their mother Gaia, desiring vengeance upon the gods for the downfall of her Titan sons, gave the giants an enchanted protection. They could not be slain by any divine hand. Only a mortal could bring about their death. Fearing for her children, Gaia sought a herb that would make the giants immortal even against mortal weapons. But Zeus, foreseeing her plan, forbade the light of dawn, moon, and sun to shine upon the world until he himself found and cut the herb. Deprived of its power, the giants were left vulnerable not to gods, but to Heracles, the mortal son of Zeus. The battle on the Phlegrean fields. The giants marched upon the gods across the Phlegrean plains of Pallene, hurling mountains and burning trees as if they were spears. The earth trembled beneath their steps, and they were burned with the fire of Zeus's Thunderbolts. Then came Heracles, standing beside Athena, radiant and terrible, his bow gleaming with the venom of the Hydra. The first to fall was Alcestis, mightiest of the giants. Heracles' arrow pierced his chest, and he fell with a cry that shook the heavens. Yet Alcestis could not die upon the land of Pallene, for there he was immortal. Each time he touched the ground, he rose stronger than before. Understanding the secret, Heracles lifted him upon his shoulders and carried him beyond the borders of his homeland. The moment his feet no longer touched the sacred soil, the giant's strength failed and he died. The death of Porphyrion and the fall of the giants, raging with grief. The giant Porphyrion rushed upon Hera, tore the veil from her face, and sought to seize her. But Zeus struck him with a blinding bolt of lightning, and Heracles' arrow ended his life. Apollo, the far-shooting archer, pierced the left eye of Ephialtes with a golden arrow, while Heracles' shaft struck the right. Together they felled the twin-eyed terror. The wine god Dionysus crushed Euripides with his thyrsus. Hephaestus hurled molten iron upon Clitus, and Athena pursued Enceladus, burying him beneath the weight of an entire island of Sicily, whose volcano still smokes from his fury. Poseidon, the earthshaker, pursued polybotes across the sea. When the giant tried to escape upon the waves, Poseidon tore a fragment of the island of Kos with his trident and hurled it upon him. The stone sank him forever, forming the island of Nisairos. Hermes struck down Hippolytus, Artemis felled Gratian, and even the Morea, the Fates themselves, lifted bronze clubs to slay Agrias and Thone. At last, Zeus, with thunder in his hand, unleashed his final storm. Lightning rained upon the battlefield, and the cries of the dying giants filled the world. But it was Heracles, the mortal-born, whose arrows dealt the death blow to them all. The triumph of Olympus. When the storm passed, the mountains were blackened, the earth still smoking, and the air reeked of scorched stone and ash. The rebellion of the giants was ended. The gods of Olympus had triumphed, yet it was Heracles, the son of both god and mortal woman, who made that victory possible. Thus, between heaven and earth, Heracles stood as the bridge. The power of men joined with the will of the divine, the mortal who made even the gods invincible. The death of Heracles and his ascent to Olympus. After Sophocles' Trachonia, when Heracles was sold into bondage to Omphale for the killing of Iphitos, his wife Deianira left Turns with their children and found refuge in Trachis under King Ceyx. 3 years and 3 months passed without word. Haunted by a prophecy, Heracles had left. Either he would die after that span abroad, or return to a life of peace. Deianira sent their son Hylas to search for his father. News finally came. The herald liches arrived, announcing Heracles was alive, had sacked Oechalia, slaying King Euripides, and was preparing sacrifices before returning. Among the captives stood Iole, Euripides' daughter, silent, grief-stricken, and astonishingly beautiful. A servant soon told Deianira the truth. Liches had softened. Heracles had taken Oechalia for Iole's sake and meant to make her his wife, stricken with jealousy and fear of losing her husband. Deianira remembered the dying Centaur Nessus, who years before had told her that his blood could win back Heracles' love. Not knowing Nessus's blood was poisoned with the Hydra's venom, she anointed a fine robe with it, sealed it in a chest, and sent it by Liches to Heracles with strict instructions. No sunbeam must touch it before he wore it for the sacrifice. On Euboea, at Cape Ceryneian, Heracles donned the robe to offer 100 victims, 12 of them to Zeus. As the altar flames warmed him, the poison awakened. The cloth clung to his flesh. Agony coursed through his body. In a frenzy he seized Liches and hurled him against the rocks, killing him, then collapsed, convulsed with pain. He ordered his men to carry him back toward Trachis. Hylas reached home ahead of the bearers and confronted his mother with what he had witnessed. Realizing too late what she had done, Deianira took her own life with a sword. Heracles was brought in on a litter, delirious with suffering. When Hylas explained the chain of accidents, Nessus's deceit, the poisoned robe, his mother's remorse, and death, Heracles recognized the fulfillment of Zeus's oracle. He would not be slain by a living foe, but by the contrivance of one already among the dead. He gave Hylas his final commands: carry him to Mount Oeta, build a funeral pyre, place him upon it, and set it alight to end the torment, and, in time, take Iole as his wife. Hylas recoiled, but Heracles pressed him to honor a dying father's will. On Oeta the friends stacked the wood and laid the hero upon it. No one dared light the fire until Philoctetes arrived. At Heracles' request he kindled the pyre. In return, Heracles bestowed on him his bow and the Hydra-poisoned arrows. As the flames rose, thunder rolled. Athena and Hermes descended in a golden chariot and bore Heracles from the blaze to Olympus. There the gods welcomed him. Hera, her hatred ended, gave him her daughter Hebe, the goddess of youth, as wife. Thus Heracles, after a life of labors and suffering, received his final recompense, apotheosis, a place among the immortals, honored forever as the protector of strength, courage, and endurance. Dear friends, our remarkable journey has come to an end. Together, we have walked beside Heracles through his trials and triumphs, his pain and redemption. We have witnessed how a man, born from the union of a god and a mortal woman, rose above every obstacle fate placed before him and, in the end, earned his place among the immortals. But Heracles is more than a hero of ancient legend. He is a symbol of human resilience, of the unbreakable spirit that endures when all seems lost. His life is not merely a tale of battles and monsters, it is a story of how struggle shapes greatness, and how even failure can become a stepping stone towards strength and wisdom. The labors of Heracles remind us that each of us, in our own way, is called to face the impossible. We all have our lions to conquer, our hydras to face, our paths through darkness to walk. And like Heracles, it is in these moments of challenge that our courage, patience, and will are truly revealed. Through his victories and his pain, Heracles teaches that greatness is not given, it is forged through endurance and faith in oneself. His story has inspired philosophers, poets, and artists for millennia. Even now, thousands of years later, it continues to speak to us, to whisper that the human soul, though fragile, is capable of extraordinary strength. Each of us can find something of ourselves in his story, the longing to overcome, the courage to continue, and the search for meaning in a world of trials. Heracles' ascent to Olympus is not merely the end of his journey. It is a reminder that greatness is possible for all who believe, persevere, and never surrender. Thank you for joining me on this voyage through myth, memory, and timeless wisdom. May the spirit of Heracles live within you. May his courage strengthen you in moments of doubt, and his triumph remind you that the greatest victories await those who dare to fight for their dreams. This concludes our lecture. Until we meet again, may your path be guided by purpose, your heart by strength, and your spirit by the light of the heroes.